The Dallas Cowboys just showed up in what might be the most perfect mock draft scenario we've seen all offseason, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this could change everything about how we approach this rebuild. Before we break this thing down piece by piece, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because we are bringing you every single Cowboys update the second it happens, and I'm talking roster moves, draft breaking news, free agency rumors, all of it. And with the draft coming up fast, you cannot afford to miss a single video we're putting out here. Now, let me tell you why this particular mock draft from one of the most respected NFL analysts out there has me more excited than I've been in months, because when you look at what fell to Dallas at both 12 and 20 overall, you start to realize that maybe, just maybe, the football gods are finally smiling down on this franchise after years of heartbreak and early playoff exits. This isn't some random 7-round projection thrown together for clicks. This is from someone who only puts out 2 mock drafts per year, which means every single pick is calculated and thought out with real intel from around the league. And what he has Dallas doing here is honestly almost too good to be true. Let's set the stage first, because the way this draft board shakes out is critical to understanding why this is such a dream scenario for America's team. The top of the draft goes exactly how you'd want it to if you're sitting in the Cowboys war room with a quarterback going number 1 overall and a couple of running backs flying off the board in the top 3 picks, which immediately starts pushing defensive talent down the board right into our range. Then you see 3 straight offensive players go in a row with a running back to Tennessee and a couple of guys who, frankly, I think are reaching a bit going 5th and 6th to the Giants and Browns. And this is where it gets interesting, because every time an offensive player goes early, that's another blue chip defender sliding closer and closer to pick 12. A safety does go 7th, a receiver goes 8th, which isn't ideal because that's a player Dallas might have liked. Then another receiver to the Chiefs at 9 and a defensive lineman to Cincinnati at 10. And here's the crazy part. After a receiver goes to Miami at 11, suddenly the board is sitting there with one of the absolute best pure football players in this entire class still available, and Dallas is on the clock. Caleb Downs is the pick at 12, and I'm telling you right now, this is the guy I have had circled as my number 1 overall prospect, regardless of position, for months now, and I'm not alone in that evaluation. The analyst who made this mock talked to the Ohio State defensive coordinator, who flat out said Downs will be the smartest player on whatever team drafts him and should be a face of the franchise type guy. And when you have that kind of endorsement from someone who coached him every single day, you have to take that seriously. Now, I know what some of you are thinking: safety at 12 when we need pass rush and corner help. Is that really the move? But here's what nobody is talking about when it comes to how Downs would actually be used in this defense. This isn't about plugging him in at free safety and having him play deep zone all game. This is about versatility and football IQ and the ability to play nickel corner, which has become one of the most critical positions in the entire Christian Parker defensive scheme that Dallas is running right now. The Cowboys gave up 54 explosive plays of 25 yards or more last season, which was the worst mark in the entire National Football League. And when you're bleeding big plays like that, you cannot afford to pass on a player who has the instincts and range and processing speed to erase mistakes before they turn into touchdowns. I've seen some people try to dismiss Downs as a system player, and I'm going to be blunt with you. That might be the most ridiculous thing I've heard all offseason, because this kid played in 3 completely different defensive systems during his college career, and he dominated in every single one of them. He started as a true freshman at Alabama, where Nick Saban immediately trusted him with a starting role, which tells you everything you need to know about his maturity and football intelligence. Then he transferred to Ohio State and didn't miss a beat in a totally different scheme with different coaching and different responsibilities. This is a guy who was a team captain, who communicates at an elite level, who has that dog mentality you want in your secondary, and I genuinely believe he could be wearing a captain's patch for the Cowboys before his rookie contract is even up, because that's the type of leader and tone setter he is on the field. Some draft analysts have compared him to Minkah Fitzpatrick in terms of play style, with a Budda Baker type body, and I think the Malcolm Jenkins comparison is pretty spot on when you think about that safety / nickel hybrid role that Jenkins played for years in Philadelphia. He's not your classic single high rangy center field safety like a Jesse Bates type, but he is always around the football making plays and bringing a level of consistency that this Dallas defense has been missing for way too long. Now, let me pump the brakes for just a second and be realistic about what Downs isn't, because I don't want to oversell this and set unrealistic expectations. He's not going to go out there and lock down prime slot receivers one-on-one in man coverage every single snap. He's not going to be your burner who runs a 4-3 and closes on deep balls from 30 yards away. But what he does bring is exactly what this defense is lacking right now, which is intelligence, versatility, leadership, and the ability to play multiple roles at a high level. The Cowboys have been desperate for a chess piece on defense who the coordinator can move around around and trust in any situation. And Downs is that guy without question. If Dallas can land him at 12, I almost don't care what happens with the 20th pick, because you just got a cornerstone defensive player who is going to start week one and make an immediate impact. But here's the thing, the way this mock draft plays out, the Cowboys might actually hit a home run with both first round selections, and that's where this gets really spicy. Between pick 12 and pick 20, a few more players come off the board, including some offensive linemen and a couple more skill position guys, and that means more defensive talent keeps sliding down the board, which is music to the ears of a Cowboys front office that knows this team lives and dies with how the defense performs. At pick 20, Dallas goes with Rueben Bain, who is an edge rusher out of Miami. And there has been legitimate reporting from league insiders suggesting that this guy could have been in play for the Cowboys as early as pick 12 if the board fell a certain way, so getting him at 20 is an absolute steal if the medicals check out. Now, I have to mention the concerns here because Bain is one of the older prospects in this class, having just turned 25 years old, which is significant when you're talking about a first-round investment. And there have also been some injury red flags, specifically with his foot, that caused him to switch to custom cleats during the season. However, recent reports indicate that the medical side has been cleared and the foot is not expected to be a long-term issue. And if that's accurate, then you're looking at one of the most pro-ready pass rushers in this entire draft class falling right into your lap at the back of the first round. Let me tell you what Bain brings to the table, because when you watch the tape, this dude was an absolute menace for Miami all season long. He racked up 12.5 sacks and 17 tackles for loss during the regular season. And then when the lights got brightest in the college football playoff, he turned it up even more with an 18% pressure rate and 5.5 sacks in those biggest games. That's the kind of production and consistency you want from an edge rusher. And the fact that he showed up in the playoff tells you he's not going to shrink in big moments, which is critical when you're trying to win in January. He didn't test at the combine, which is a little bit of a red flag for some teams. But when you go back and watch his 2022 tape when he was healthier, you can see he's a legitimate athlete with a diverse pass rush arsenal and the kind of bend and burst you need to win off the edge in the NFL. He's Canadian, which might sound like a random detail, but the Cowboys historically have had a lot of success with Canadian players, and there's a real pipeline there that the front office values. So that's just another small check mark in his favor. If you ignore the age for a second, which I know is hard to do because 25 is legitimately older than some guys who have already been in the league for a couple years. But if you focus purely on the talent and the production and the readiness to contribute right away, I'm not sure there are 10 better pure football players in this class than Rueben Bain. Now, obviously, the age matters, and that's why he's available at 20 instead of going in the top 10. But here's the flip side of that argument. If you're the Dallas Cowboys and you're trying to maximize the Dak Prescott window and win championships in the next 2 to 3 years, does it really matter if your edge rusher is 25 instead of 22 if he can come in and give you 10 sacks right away? I would argue that the age actually works in your favor in the short term because you're getting a more mature player who has seen every look and every blocking scheme and is ready to produce immediately instead of hoping a 21-year-old figures it out by year 2. The medicals are the real question mark here, and if the foot is truly good to go, then this is a no-brainer pick at 20. But if there's any lingering concern about durability or long-term health, then you have to think twice because you cannot afford to waste a first-round pick on a guy who's going to miss half the season every year. Let's talk about some of the other names that were still on the board when Dallas made these picks because context matters, and you want to know what the alternatives were if the Cowboys went a different direction. A couple of defensive tackles, including one from Clemson, who is super divisive among scouts, were still available. A few cornerbacks had slid. And interestingly enough, one of the top linebacker prospects in the class, who a lot of people thought would go in the top 20, was still sitting there unsigned when round 1 ended. That tells you the board was loaded with defensive talent at that point, and Dallas could have gone multiple directions. But I think the combination of Downs and Bain addresses 2 of the 3 biggest needs on this roster, which are secondary help and pass rush. And yes, linebacker is still a massive concern that has to be addressed in round 2 or 3, but you can't fill every hole in one draft. The reality is, if you come out of round 1 with a day 1 starting safety who can play nickel and a double-digit sack edge rusher who is ready to contribute immediately, you have had a phenomenal draft regardless of what happens after that, and that's exactly what this mock draft gives the Cowboys. One thing I want to point out that I think is getting overlooked in all of this is how both of these guys fit the culture and leadership profile that Dallas desperately needs to rebuild in that locker room. We've heard all offseason about how this team lacked accountability and toughness and guys who would hold each other to a standard. And both Caleb Downs and Rueben Bain are known as high character leaders who bring that edge and that competitive fire every single day. Downs was a captain at Ohio State and is universally respected for his preparation and his ability to communicate and get guys lined up correctly, which is massive when you're playing in a complex defense that requires everyone to be on the same page. Bain has that dog mentality and that relentless motor that shows up on every snap. And when you add those two personalities to a defense that frankly has been too soft for too long, you're starting to change the DNA of this roster in a real way. This isn't just about talent and production. It's about bringing in the right kind of people who are going to set a tone and demand excellence from everyone around them. And that's how you build a championship defense. Now let's talk about what this means for the salary cap and the overall roster construction, because draft picks are great, but they have to fit into the bigger financial picture. The beauty of hitting on first round picks is that you get 4 or 5 years of cost controlled production from premium players. And when you're a team like Dallas that has a lot of money tied up in Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and a few other key veterans, you need those rookie contracts to give you high level starters at a fraction of what you'd pay in free agency. If Downs and Bain both pan out the way this mock draft suggests, you're talking about 2 impact starters making a combined $3 or $4 million in year one, and that allows you to spend money elsewhere on the roster, whether that's re-signing your own guys or adding a veteran piece or two in free agency next offseason. The Cowboys have been criticized for years for not drafting well enough to offset the big contracts they hand out, and if this draft scenario plays out, it would be a massive step in the right direction toward building a sustainable contender instead of mortgaging the future every single year. From a coaching staff perspective, this is exactly the kind of draft haul that Mike McCarthy and his staff need to keep their jobs long term, because the pressure is on in a major way after another disappointing playoff loss. The defensive coordinator has made it clear that he wants versatile defensive backs who can play multiple roles, and he wants edge rushers who can win one-on-one matchups. And guess what? Downs and Bain check both of those boxes perfectly. If the defense takes a leap next season and these two rookies are major contributors to that improvement, it buys the coaching staff another year or two to prove they can win a Super Bowl with this core. And if it doesn't work out, then at least the next coaching staff is going to inherit 2 really good young defensive players to build around. Either way, this is the type of draft capital investment that sets the franchise up for success regardless of who is calling the plays in 2026 and beyond. And that's smart team building that has been missing in Dallas for far too long. So what does this mean for week 1 and the immediate future of this football team? Because at the end of the day, we all want to know if this makes the Cowboys better right now. If Caleb Downs is your starting nickel corner and he's playing 70% of the snaps in the slot and over the top, you immediately have better communication, fewer busted coverages, and a guy who can match up with tight ends and bigger slot receivers, which has been a nightmare matchup for Dallas in recent years. If Rueben Bain is rushing off the edge opposite Micah Parsons and he's giving you 8 to 10 sacks as a rookie, suddenly your pass rush is legitimately scary and quarterbacks can't just slide protection one way and forget about the other side. Those 2 additions alone would transform this defense from a unit that got shredded by big plays and couldn't get consistent pressure into a group that can actually get stops in critical moments. And in the NFC East, where every game matters and the margins are razor thin, that could be the difference between 10 wins and 13 wins, between a wild card exit and a deep playoff run. But here's what nobody is talking about when it comes to the ripple effects of landing these 2 players in the draft, and that's how it impacts the rest of the offseason and the decisions Dallas makes in free agency and potential trades. If you feel confident that you just added 2 starting caliber defenders in the first round, maybe you don't overpay for a veteran edge rusher in free agency, and you can allocate that money toward offensive line help or another cornerback or extending one of your own guys. If you know you have Downs locked in as your nickel corner, maybe you don't reach on a cornerback in round 2 and you can focus on linebacker or interior offensive line, which are also positions of need. The draft doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every pick you make changes the calculus for every other decision you have to make, and nailing your first 2 picks gives you so much more flexibility to be smart and patient with the rest of your offseason instead of panicking and reaching on guys just to fill holes. That's how good teams operate. They trust their draft process. They hit on premium picks, and then they build around that foundation with smart complementary moves instead of trying to fix everything with expensive free agents who may or may not work out. And listen, I know some of you are sitting there thinking this sounds way too good to be true, and there's no way both of these guys are actually going to be sitting there when Dallas picks. And I get that skepticism because we've been burned before by mock drafts that had us taking generational talent only to watch three teams trade up ahead of us and steal the guys we wanted. But here's the thing, this mock draft came from someone who has legitimate connections around the league and who only puts out 2 mocks per year specifically because he's trying to be accurate based on real intel. So while nothing is guaranteed and the board could shake out completely differently on draft night, this is at least a realistic scenario that has a real chance of happening. Stranger things have happened in the draft. We've seen guys fall for medical reasons or age concerns or because teams get enamored with quarterbacks and skill position players. And if Dallas is sitting there at 12 and Caleb Downs is staring them in the face, I would be stunned if they passed on him for anyone else because he is that good and that perfect of a fit for what they need. One more thing I want to hit on before we wrap this up, and that's the mental and emotional side of what it would mean for this fan base if the Cowboys actually nail this draft the way this mock suggests. We have been through years of heartbreak and disappointment, and watching this team come up short in the biggest moments, and a huge part of that has been the failure to consistently draft impact players who can change games in January. If Dallas comes out of round 1 with 2 legitimate stars who contribute right away and help turn this defense into a top 10 unit, the entire vibe around this franchise shifts in a major way. Suddenly there's real hope. There's tangible evidence that the front office knows what it's doing. There's proof that this team is built to compete for championships and not just rack up regular season wins before flaming out in the playoffs. That momentum and that belief can carry over into the locker room, into the coaching staff, into the way free agents view Dallas as a destination, and it creates a culture of winning instead of a culture of excuses and what-ifs. This is the type of draft that can change the trajectory of a franchise for the next 5 years, and if it happens the way this mock lays out, we might look back on this as the moment everything finally clicked for the Dallas Cowboys. Before we close this out, make sure you smash that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we are covering every single angle of this draft process from now until the Cowboys are on the clock, and you do not want to miss any of the breaking news or updates or last-minute rumors that could change everything. So here's my final take on this whole thing. If the Dallas Cowboys can walk away from round 1 with Caleb Downs and Rueben Bain, they will have had one of the best drafts in the entire league, regardless of what any other team does, because you're talking about 2 high-floor, high-ceiling players who address massive needs and bring the leadership and mentality this team has been missing. The age and medical stuff with Bain has to be monitored closely, and if there's any red flags there, you pivot to someone else. But assuming he checks out, this is as close to a perfect scenario as you can realistically hope for in a draft class that doesn't have 5 slam dunk generational prospects at the top. Now, I want to hear from you. Would you be thrilled with Downs and Bain as the 2 first-round picks? Or is there someone else you'd rather see Dallas target at 12 or 20? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, and let's get a conversation going, because draft season is the best time of year, and I want to know what the real fans think about this roster and where we go from here.